Talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to connect.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Sunday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. Hope everybody is ready for a fun show and what should be a fun week. Hope everybody is getting ready to travel, spend time with family for the holiday. But we got a lot of college football to talk about today here on a Sunday night. Okay, college football. It went haywire on Saturday. By my count, 7 top 20 teams all fell on Saturday, all with playoff implications. We're going to focus on the 4 big ones, I think. Alabama losing to Oklahoma, Ole Miss losing to Florida, Indiana losing to Ohio State, Texas A&M losing to Auburn. What did each loss mean for that individual team for the playoff picture? And I think there's some big picture questions, especially at Bama and Ole Miss, in terms of everything that was lost in a season that feels largely lost in those 2 schools. So we got a busy show. We got a fun show. Everybody hop on in. We threw a poll in the chat today. We're on fire. I'm not going to lie. We are so fired up for today's show. And by the way, we're going to talk about those 4 games. And then we're going to talk about what does the playoff picture look like here as we approach the final weekend of the regular season. And really, I think as importantly, what did those games specifically mean for the playoff picture in terms of who's in, who's out, what needs to happen this weekend? Because I think it's fascinating. So the focus is on those 4 games. And then, oh, by the way, we will dive into what it all means for the playoff picture. Before we get started, a couple quick reminders. First of all, please make sure that you are subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast and the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast YouTube page on YouTube. Click the subscribe button. New clips, new videos going up every single day. And also make sure you're subscribed to the podcast as well. You can listen on Apple. You can listen on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If you do want to leave a 5-star rating and review, I would appreciate it. By the way, a little bit of a scheduling note, normal Sunday show, Monday morning show, if you're on the podcast feed right now. I'll probably do the college football preview show. We'll do the dual college football betting pod along with the Aaron Torres pod. We'll put it on both feeds. That'll be in your feeds on Tuesday. And then Tuesday night, I'll actually be at the Kansas-Duke game in Vegas. So excited for that. So maybe by the end of the week, we'll do a little bit of college basketball heading into your Wednesday night or Wednesday day, I should say. And then once we get to Thursday, Friday, all bets are off. It's really hard to know. Also, before we get started, do want to welcome back one of our favorite partners. We love working with them. I've told you all about them. Torres is talking Collie Puffs and ColliePuffs.com. Okay, so it's that time of year. Here's the bottom line. You're on the couch. You're going to be on the couch even more this week. You're going to be watching Thanksgiving Day football, Black Friday football, Saturday rivalry college football. And what you need is a snack that is healthy, but also delicious. And that's where my friends Collie Puffs come in, okay? Family-owned company, not far from where I live. The owner, Joey, is no different than you and I. He's actually not only a football fan, but a season ticket holder for the NFL team right down the street here. And I bring it up because he was trying to figure out, what can I eat while I'm sitting on the couch, stuffing my face, watching football all day on Sunday? What can I eat that my kids will like that is healthy, but also delicious? That's where he came up with Collie Puffs. Baked, not fried, healthy ingredients, avocado oil, no grease. It's the opposite of the Doritos and Fritos in your grocery aisle. But the best part is they taste freaking delicious. Okay, we love them. We have them in the Torres household. But here's the best part. You don't have to take my word for it. You can just try them out for yourself. To try them for yourself, all these different flavors, just do me a favor. Go to ColliePuffs.com. That's CAULIPUFFS.com. Also, they are available on Amazon. And I do want to note this. There is a Black Friday sale on Amazon. So if you search Collie Puffs on Amazon, 25% off your purchase. So basically, you go on Amazon, throw them in your cart. It's 25% off. You don't need a promo code. You don't need to discount this. All you got to do, go to Amazon.com, throw them in your cart, and try them for yourself. So we appreciate Collie Puffs. They are a friend, a partner of the Aaron Torres pod. And we're excited to be working with him going forward. You are going to love him. Try him for yourself. CallLeapPuffs.com. With that said, it is a busy, busy, busy Sunday in college football. There is no more time to waste. So let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, I'll say this, is that, I was even thinking about this last week, is the idea that it felt like it was a little bit of a quieter college football season. We're trying to figure out this new 12-team playoff. There's been no real coaching changes at the highest level. And so we come into this weekend and we think we have it all figured out, right? I mean, remember the conversations we were having last Tuesday, Wednesday? Oh, Indiana, if they lose to Ohio State bad, what does it mean for the college football playoff picture? What doesn't it mean? This and that. Yeah, as it turns out, Indiana did lose to Ohio State, but that was far from the only thing that mattered in the world of college football on Saturday. And in some ways, the Indiana-Ohio State result was one of the least interesting results because we had several top 20 upsets, and because of it, the college football playoff landscape was shaken up. I said it with the Indiana segment last week. Let's wait until the results go final before we start arguing resumes, and we got insanity across college football. Alabama loses to Oklahoma. Ole Miss loses to Florida. We mentioned Indiana losing to Ohio State, and oh, by the way, on top of that, let's not also forget that late in the game, producer Matt's Auburn Tigers pulled off the 4-overtime upset of Texas A&M. And so what I want to do, I want to break down all 4 of those games and really talk about the stakes in each. But I think as significant, I do want to talk about really like what it all means for the playoff picture. And I want to rank, by the way, because I'm all over the place. It's whatever. It's a fun show to do. I want to rank the most significant losses and what they mean again. All right, since I'm done rambling, let's dive in. And I want to talk about what I believe was the most significant loss on Saturday. That was Alabama going to Oklahoma, losing to the Sooners in this game. Final score 24-3. Oklahoma, 260 yards of total offense. And here we go, or 260 yards of rushing offense, excuse me. So here we go again with the conversations about Kalen DeBoer. Alabama takes its second loss to an unranked team, its third loss overall. I really thought its second unexcusably poor performance of the season. And like I said, we got a lot to dive into. So Oklahoma wins. First of all, let me spend a minute. I want to give credit to Oklahoma. Okay. It's been a tough season. And I think, let me just say this too, been a tough week for Brent Venables. I don't know how many people saw this. This is an awful story, but his wife had previously been diagnosed with cancer. It turns out that it was in remission. Then he found out last week that it was coming back. He really hasn't been vocal about it, but the story got out. And so I'm happy for him. I'm happy for this Oklahoma team. And before we get to the Alabama side of things and how disappointing it is, let me say this. I don't know if this will be an unpopular opinion with Oklahoma fans. I'm not nearly as down on Venables as everybody else is. I understand it's Oklahoma. I understand the standard. I understand he won 10 games last year, but he is a defensive coach. The defense has been great. The wide receiver core has been banged up all year. I think at one point, like their top 6 receivers were all out with injuries. They've all missed time. And really, the big issue was we knew coming in the O-line was going to be a problem. Well, that was the problem for most of the year. So I don't think you can judge the offense. I don't think you can judge Jackson Arnold. The defense is great. And for Oklahoma, the goal is go into the portal, work, get O-linemen. I know they're the toughest position to find in the portal, but listen, we could criticize Colorado. In one offseason, they rebuilt that O-line, went from 4 wins to now 8, maybe 9. It can be done, but I don't think Oklahoma's that far off from being a very interesting team going into next season. Still, as I always say, the more interesting story is in the losing locker room, and the more interesting story is Alabama, because you go on the road, you get embarrassed, and I just threw out the stat, 260 yards rushing for Oklahoma. They couldn't move the football all year. 260 yards rushing for Oklahoma, 5 yards per carry on 49 carries over the course of the game. And when I look at this, here's my big picture takeaway on the state of Alabama football. I think it goes without saying the third loss all but eliminates them from the playoff picture. We'll talk big picture playoff stuff later on. But to me, you know what really stands out? I think there is one reason that I want to defend Kalen DeBoer for everything that has happened this year. And I think there's one reason that what has happened at Alabama is absolutely inexcusable and does fall on Kalen DeBoer that needs to be talked about. Now, why I'm going to defend Kalen DeBoer, I don't think Jalen Milroe was ever the guy that if Kalen DeBoer was picking a quarterback that he thought was perfect for this offense, awesome for this offense, I don't think Jalen Milroe is the guy, okay? And I think Kalen DeBoer did about as well of a job as he possibly could coaching around Jalen Milroe this year. But I said it after the game on Saturday is Alabama's offense. It's week 13. I still don't know what Alabama's offense is when Jalen Milroe isn't ripping off 20 yards per carry, which is basically what he did against LSU. We talked about it coming into this game. Go to Alabama's games where they've struggled this year, and it's largely been because once you slow down Jalen Milroe, the offense sputters, okay? Second half of Georgia, they shut down Jalen Milroe's run game. All of a sudden, boom, it's a competitive game. South Carolina easily could have won, shut down Jalen Milroe. Tennessee did shut down Jalen Milroe and won the game. And so I'm not going to blame Kalen DeBoer in total. By the way, and producer Matt, pop up the Nick Saban tweet here because this was I'll say this, I think it's one of my great takes that I've ever had. I think it just shows again how great Nick Saban was because Nick Saban last year had Jalen Milroe, and I understand they had a couple more pieces on defense or whatever. But against arguably a tougher schedule, I tweeted this out. Nick Saban coached around Jalen Milroe's limitations, went 11-1, undefeated in the SEC, and won a league title. As I said at the time, I still believe that Kalen DeBoer is going to be good at Alabama, but it shows why Nick Saban was and will always be the GOAT. And so Nick Saban did a great job coaching around Jalen Milroe last year. I think Kalen DeBoer did about as well as he could. Jalen Milroe's not Michael Penix. He doesn't have a great touch. He throws a pretty deep ball, whatever, but he's not the same player, and he's not a Kalen DeBoer quarterback. And so until Kalen DeBoer has his quarterback, it's hard for me to get angry and fired up about the state of Alabama football and the state of this program. I do think it'll be interesting. It's going to be an interesting offseason. DeBoer's going to be under the microscope after a third loss, a second really inexcusable loss. But I need to see what it looks like with the backup, Austin Mack, who he brought from Washington, who was the heir apparent for Michael Penix. I need to see what it looks like with Keelan Russell, the 5-star kid that everybody is raving about that Alabama's bringing in. Until that happens, it's going to be hard for me to really criticize Kalen DeBoer because, again, I don't think Jalen Milroe is the quarterback he would have wanted. And all season long, I've been saying it since the Vandy game. Everybody was focused on the defense against Vandy. And I said, look, I get the defense hasn't been very good, but to me, it's the fact that when Jalen Milroe isn't running the ball, you have no offense. And so that's the part that I don't blame Kalen DeBoer on. Now, what I do blame Kalen DeBoer on, and where I think there is a big picture conversation that needs to be had, that is the second time this year that Alabama has shown up completely unprepared to play. And I understand that everything Kalen DeBoer does is a comparison to Nick Saban. I understand that Nick Saban is the greatest to ever do this, in my opinion. But Kalen DeBoer knew what he was going to sign up for. He knew what he signed up for. He knew that every time there was a wrong twist, a wrong turn, he was going to be compared to Nick Saban. So I don't feel sympathy. And I will say this about the previous coaching staff versus the current coaching staff. You can say what you want about Nick Saban. Lost to Texas last year, lost to Michigan last year, had lost to Georgia in a title game. Nick Saban's teams never lost because they were unprepared, not ready to play. And this is the second time this season this happened. The Vandy game, it was different. It was more high scoring, but it was a team that was not ready to play. Oklahoma, it was different. It was low scoring, but it was a team that was not ready to play. And so there is no way to describe this first year of the Kalen DeBoer era other than an abject failure. And it's not a failure because Alabama didn't make the playoff and is almost certainly not going to make the playoff is probably the right way to say it. Why it is an abject failure is because when you looked at the schedule, you could see the scenario where Alabama went 9-3 in the preseason and missed the college football playoff. Georgia at home, at Tennessee, at LSU. We thought Oklahoma was going to be good in the preseason. But to lose 3 games, that's not the problem. The problem is you lost 3 games, including 2 of them where you just didn't show up ready to play against inferior opponents. And oh, by the way, they were both on the road, which I think is significant in its own right because you showed up ready to play against LSU. That's your big rival. I think you largely showed up ready to play against Tennessee. Tennessee is just a good team. Those are your 2 rivals. You should be showing up ready to play. The counter to that is the two games that you should have won, no doubt about it, on the road, you didn't play well. You didn't show up ready to play. And so when I look at the state of Alabama football, guess what? Listen, I can't see into the future. But one thing I can say is this. As long as Kalen DeBoer is there, they're going to have to play on the road in the SEC. And you're going to have to win these types of games. And I think that's where it's frustrating. And that's on top of all of the stuff that we've already talked about with Alabama. The idea that, by the way, you look at a situation where, the penalties against Vandy in what was it? The Tennessee game, Kendrick Law gets the dumb penalty late in the game. Vanderbilt, you look at that game where Malachi Moore kicks the football when the game's over. The point I'm trying to make, I'm not going to blame Kalen DeBoer because he doesn't have his quarterback, but that stuff absolutely positively has to get cleaned up. And there is no excuses for Alabama not showing up ready to play. What do I do here? Do I take a quick break? We're already 15 minutes in here. Tell you what, producer Matt, roll the tape. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back, talk about the other three games, the losses, and then we will talk about the playoff ramifications. I am so fired up about that Alabama game. Drop your questions, drop your comments in the chat. We will get to them momentarily. Quick break. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. More Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rule shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. All right, back. Good to be back. So let's keep the conversation going on the four big losses on Saturday in college football. I believe Alabama was the most crushing loss because of the standard that the previous coaching staff had set. And then bottom line, also because of the fact that they really just did not show up for two games. But I think you can absolutely put Ole Miss losing to Florida 24-17 right in the conversation as most disappointing losses from Saturday, and the big picture ramifications are huge. So let's go ahead and dive into this one. Ole Miss again falls 24-17. Listen, like we did with Oklahoma, I'm not going to spend very much time on Florida. If you're new to this show or if you're not new to this show, I have done 3, 4, 5 Florida segments. I give Billy Napier credit. I got to own that I was dead wrong with him. I was the guy in September after the Miami game, the A&M game, talking about he's not the guy, this, that, the other thing. But I'll also say this. It was clear after the first bye against Central Florida that they were trending in the right direction. It was clear that DJ Lagway was the future. And I've been saying since the day they announced he's coming back, it was the right decision. So I'm happy for him. He deserved that moment. To all the haters like myself, Billy Napier stuffed us in a locker, okay? That's going to lead the next time we do Aaron right, Aaron wrong. I was dead wrong on Billy Napier. But the story here is Ole Miss. And as I said, I think it is as disappointing of a loss as any I think that we've seen in all of college football this year, because you go back to September and October when Vandy beat Alabama, when Arkansas beat Tennessee, when Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. We didn't know what the stakes were. We do now, and the Georgia win put Ole Miss in position where everything was ahead of them. We're going to talk about Indiana in a minute, but I think if Ole Miss had won out, there was no argument to me that they were going to be in that playoff. So to have the bye week, still not show up ready to play, it is devastating. It is crushing. And I'll just ask you a very simple question. Did Lane Kiffin just miss his best opportunity that he's ever going to have at Ole Miss to make a real shot, make a real run at a national championship? And listen, I'll be honest. These next few minutes, my take is going to be the same take that you've heard from everybody who talks about and loves college football for a living, okay? Because sometimes the obvious take is the right take. Ole Miss was all in on this year, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's the portal era. It's the NIL era. Use the resources that you have. Ole Miss has done an incredible job building up the program and building up the collective and everything that they do at that school. At the same time, we know it was at stake. Coming out of last year, what did we know? We knew they had a third-year starter in Jackson Dart at quarterback. They were coming off a 10-2 regular season, an 11-win season. First time in school history, by the way, that they won 11 games. And so they knew they were elite on offense. And they knew on defense they had to take a step up. And they used the portal. They used NIL. They used the current structure of college football to help rebuild that roster. Walter Nolan transfers from Texas A&M. Jimbo Fisher is fired. He's the number one player in the portal. Everybody wants him. He ends up at Ole Miss. Princely Umamian. I have the kid's name written down. I can never say this poor kid's name right. And I do actually apologize for it because I actually practiced. I think I have it as Umamli Ellen. Princely Umamli Ellen transfers in from Florida, okay? You have Chris Paul from Arkansas. And so I solely bring it up to say that they went all in on defense because they knew the offense was great. And then the most important part, which everybody knows, but the schedule broke their way. And I know that every year the schedule is going to be a little bit different in the SEC, but look at this Ole Miss schedule. No Texas, no Tennessee, no Alabama, no A&M in a year where A&M is actually pretty good. You do have to go to LSU, but listen, everybody's going to have to play somebody on the road. But you get Georgia at home. Oklahoma is usually pretty good, at least a preseason top 25 team. You get them at home. It was all right there for Ole Miss. And so to see it blow up with a third loss, there is no excuse. And I think it is, again, as disappointing of a season as you could possibly have. Because at the end of the day, listen, if you're a college football fan, if you're a college football historian, you know, with Ole Miss, it's just not that easy to be in this position. I know that it's a little bit of a different SEC, and I know that we're in the 12-team era, the NIL era, the portal era, okay? But this isn't LSU where every coach, whether they're good or not, basically is going to be able to put together a roster good enough to win a national championship. This isn't Ohio State. This isn't, I would say Florida. Like Florida, the reason we were so critical of Billy Napier is because we've seen two coaches in the last 30 years win a championship there. That's not Ole Miss, and I just wonder, is there ever going to be a better window than this year? Third-year starter at quarterback, Jackson Dart, that's just not going to happen very often, period. We know 2 out of 3 years it's not going to happen, and that's if you even get a guy in early enough to kind of win the starting job. On top of that, you look at the way the portal broke their way. Listen, I'll say this. We're going to start talking a lot of portal these next few weeks. I think the portal recruiting, I think is going to be a little bit de-emphasized these next few years because there's going to be fewer players once the COVID waiver of eligibility expires. And oh, by the way, this portal cycle specifically, there's not going to be any real coaching changes. And so if there's no coaching changes, where are all the players going to come from? Most of the best players in the portal every year come from schools where the coach got fired. And so I don't think it'll be that easy to rebuild. You're never going to get a better schedule than this year. Next year, by the way, you're going to have to go to Georgia. You're going to get LSU at home. You know, you're going to, all those games at home, and you still went 9-3. And I think the disappointing thing, it's like Alabama. It's not just that you went 9-3, or you're going to go 9-3 if you beat Mississippi State. It's that you went 9-3 with that schedule, and you lost 2 games that you just should not lose. You lose to Kentucky. Listen, I'm sorry. I think that disqualifies you. We'll get into a conversation in a minute about what the playoff picture could look like here going forward. It's hard to argue that if we even get to 3-loss SEC teams, that Ole Miss, which will have the worst loss out of all of them, should be in the conversation. That's the frustrating part. It's not that you're even 9-3, it's that you lost to freaking Kentucky at home. It's that Florida, you were a 10.5-point favorite. I want to give Billy Napier credit, but also you beat yourself. You had more total offense. You had all these crazy turnovers. You went 2 for 4 on fourth down. By the way, everyone talks about Jackson Dart's helmet. Everyone talks about Jackson Dart's 3 interceptions. How about the fact that his helmet came off the play before a crucial fourth down that you didn't convert? Okay, so it's like you just think about all this. I just don't know if it's ever going to get better for Ole Miss. I've made the point. I don't need to keep going, but it's crushing. And again, we will get into what the playoff picture looks like after we talk Indiana and after we talk Texas A&M. I don't see a pathway for Ole Miss, and I'll take it a step further. I think this was Lane Kiffin's best window. I think he botched it, and I think every Ole Miss fan has a right. The pathway was there. The schedule was there. Again, it's like what we just said about Alabama. If you lose at Georgia and at Bama and you get if that's what happens, then yeah. Sometimes you just lose to better teams, but you lose to Kentucky at home. You lose to Florida on the road. I know Florida's improved, but that is just a crushing way to end the season. Switch gears to the third big game of Saturday, and this one I'll be pretty quick on. It is Indiana losing at Ohio State 38-15. By the way, as somebody who had the under in this game, devastating overhit as Ryan Day, Travion Henderson takes a knee. Kurt Signetti's not calling timeouts, and Ryan Day's like, screw it, I'm shoving it down your throat anyway. Final score in this one, 38-15, as I said, though. And it's so wild. College football is the wildest sport because we came into the week talking about if Indiana loses, what does it look like? What does it have to look like? What does it mean? Da-da-da-da-da, this and that. And if they lose by this much, what does it mean? If they lose by 30, what does it mean as opposed to if they lose by 3? And so what was so funny about this game is that we talked about it all week. We overanalyzed Indiana's schedule. Everybody's fighting about Indiana. Then they lose the game. And what the crazy part is that basically it meant nothing because a minute later, Ole Miss lost to Florida. Then Alabama lost. Then Texas A&M lost. And all of a sudden you sit there and you say, if Indiana wins out, they're going to be in perfectly good shape going forward. Doesn't matter. If they beat Purdue next week and they go 11-1, they're going to college football playoff. You don't have to like the schedule. You don't have to like Kurt Signetti. You don't have to like whatever. They're getting into the playoff. Really quickly, just a couple thoughts on this game. Really the only thing that stands out, credit Ohio State. Ohio State was clearly the better team. They clearly came in ready to play. I will say this, though. I do think that as the day wore on, there was a little bit of revisionist history on how this game actually went down, okay? So Ohio State's defense won them this game. They were phenomenal. Our Torres on Ohio State account said, and I agree, Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator, he earned his paycheck in this game because they were flying. Curtis Rourke, the quarterback, had absolutely no answers. But I do think it's worth noting. Like everybody says, oh, it was a blowout. It wasn't even close. It's like, yeah, but Indiana did gift Ohio State 14 points, right? And Indiana, there's a lot of reasons they've been successful, but one of the big reasons that Indiana has been successful this year, they don't beat themselves. Came into this game top 10 in the country in fewest turnovers this season. Well, what ends up happening? It's a 7-7 game right before the half. I know the weather was lousy, but the punter fumbles the snap on the punt. We had a botched punt. Ohio State takes over on the 7-yard line. They score to go up 14-7. And then Caleb Downs returns a punt on the first 5 minutes or so of the second half. And all of a sudden, a 7-7 game becomes 21-7. And boom, just like that, it's over. And so to me, it's like, I'm not sitting here saying Indiana deserved to win or Ohio State wasn't impressive, but it is worth noting, like Ohio State, by the way, I thought it was kind of weird. Like Ryan Day clearly was not happy. He shoved in that extra touchdown. Will Howard was doing the put out the cigarette, celebration. One, aren't you Ohio State? Don't you expect to win games like that? But two, we all understand Ohio State did not break 300 yards of total offense until the final series of the game when Travion Henderson ripped off that big run. So listen, don't really know what else there is to add. We'll talk about the playoff picture in a minute, but to me, Indiana, if Indiana wins against Purdue, they are in kind of a crazy game, kind of a crazy result. Again, I think there's a little bit of revisionist history on how it actually happened. But yeah, Indiana loses, Ohio State wins. Finally, before we get to the playoff picture, and I think it's going to be a little bit of a quicker Sunday, Monday show, do want to talk about the fourth game from the day. I think everybody knows by now, producer Matt is an Auburn alum. He has watched a lot of bad football this year and beyond. And for one day, producer Matt got to enjoy the spoils that most of the rest of us do as Auburn beats Texas A&M in 4 overtimes, 43-41. Now listen, a couple things. First of all, I've said it before, I'll say it again. The overtime rules are the stupidest thing we have going in sports. I'm sorry. It's ridiculous, okay? We all know the rule, but what is it? After the second overtime, we do the from the 20-yard line in the first 2 overtimes. And then after the second overtime, we do 2-point conversions. It is so stupid. It is such a terrible way to end the game. And I would have said that if Auburn won, and I would have said it if Texas A&M had won. But Auburn does win. But what's interesting about this result, it really doesn't change all that much for Texas A&M. And we came into the day, it's so funny, right? We came into the day, Texas A&M, if Texas A&M won, it was going to set up Texas versus Texas A&M. The winner goes to the SEC championship game. The loser is basically eliminated. Well, we came out of the day, and because Alabama lost and because Ole Miss lost, even with a loss, Texas A&M is still playing to go to the SEC championship game next week against Texas. Georgia is in. Texas is in if they beat Texas A&M. But if Texas A&M beats Texas, they will be atop that 3-loss group, or the 2-loss group, that would include at that point Tennessee, assuming they win this coming weekend, and Texas. So for Texas A&M, it's really not that much. So let me just take half a second. Let me congratulate you Auburn Tigers fans. And this is supposed to be a Texas A&M segment. I get it. Not much has changed for them. But listen, I have no stakes in SEC football. I think everybody knows I'm from the Northeast, went to UConn, whatever. Who wins in the SEC does not matter to me. But one thing I will say, right? We've talked all year about Billy Napier. That locker room never quit on him. I don't think the locker room at Auburn ever quit on Hugh Freeze either. And I know people don't like Hugh Freeze, and I know they don't want to see him succeed, and I know they know from whatever happened 7, 8, 10 years ago, whatever. I don't care. But what I will say is if you've watched this team all year, a couple things stand out. One, credit Peyton Thorne. Peyton Thorne has been better over the back half of this year. And he took so much disdain. He got benched earlier in the year. He, of course, was part of the conversation when Hugh Freeze said at the podium, we have to find a quarterback who stops turning over the football. We know he was talking about Peyton Thorne, okay? So for Peyton Thorne to have this win on senior day, like, I'm happy for the kid. You know, he did have 1 interception in this game. But also, and I said this in the preview show, I don't know how many people realize this. He actually had only thrown 1 interception after October 1st, since the calendar turned to October. So he has been much better. He deserved this moment. Auburn fans certainly deserve this moment. And again, I just give the team so much credit because they never quit on the coach. Like, I remember going into the Auburn-Kentucky game. Remember talking to producer Matt about it. By the way, producer Matt runs our Torres on Auburn account. Make sure you're following that if you're an Auburn fan watching this video. But you go back to the Kentucky game, and Auburn, I think, was like a 3.5-point underdog, something like that. And I said, I think they're going to win because I don't think they've quit on Hugh Freeze. And you go back through the season. I'm not saying they should be in the conversation with Texas and Georgia and Texas A&M. That's not what I'm saying, in Tennessee. But what I am saying, 4th quarter lead against Oklahoma, couldn't close out. Right in and against Arkansas, 5 turnovers, obviously didn't win. 4 turnovers against Cal. Beyond that, I would also add this. What was it? The Missouri game, up double digits in the 4th quarter. And you just couldn't close out those wins. And now, if you're Auburn, you finally get over the hump. It's on senior day. The fans get to rush the field. So I'm happy for those fans who showed up every single week and didn't necessarily watch the best football. But I'll also tell you this. If we're going to do the whole Florida is on the rise as a program conversation after they beat Ole Miss, we probably sort of have to do the same for Auburn too, don't we? Like, listen, it's not as obvious. You know, Florida, of course, has beaten ranked teams in back-to-back weeks. They beat LSU last week. They beat Ole Miss this week. They're going to probably be 7-5 after they take care of Florida State this weekend. Auburn's obviously 5-6 right now. They need to beat Alabama in the Iron Bowl to get to a bowl game. But if you actually pay attention to Auburn, there's actually reason for excitement, okay? First of all you got to do is watch the game. I'm not a scouting expert, an evaluation expert, whatever. Cam Coleman, that freshman wide receiver, oh my goodness. Like, we don't talk about him because Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State is the freak of all freaks. If Jeremiah Smith is 1A freak true freshman, Cam Coleman is number 2. And I think it's worth noting the last 2 games, he has been unbelievable. 128 yards, 7 catches, 2 touchdowns on Saturday night against Texas A&M. 100 yards, 8 catches, 3 touchdowns the week before against UL Monroe. And so you look at the fact that you look at everything that he has done the last 2 weeks, you can see why he was such a highly touted recruit. And oh, by the way, on top of that, why Texas A&M wanted him desperately. Remember, he was committed to A&M before he flipped to Auburn. So you have him in the fold. Oh, by the way, for fun, I looked up some stats on the defense at Texas at Auburn. Okay, Auburn. How about this? Of their top 10 leading tacklers, half of them, 5, are freshmen and sophomores. Their top 3 in TFLs, 3 are freshmen and sophomores. I think it's the top 5 in TFLs, 3 are freshmen and sophomores. And then in sacks, of the top 3, 2 are freshmen or sophomores. So there's a lot of young talent in this program. If you watch the game, Louis Riddick talked about it a few times. No relation to DeMarcus Riddick, which he also mentioned on the broadcast. But he said, he's like, look, Hugh Freeze has been vocal with us that he is building through the high school ranks. We'll see if it works, but that is what he is betting his career on at Auburn. And so a lot of young talent in this program. But then, of course, the interesting note is that it's going to get better. Top 5 class coming in. If there was any thought of that class breaking up, I think it was probably put to rest after this game. Deuce Knight, the 5-star quarterback, was at this game posing with players in the locker room. And I think overall, by the way, it's worth noting, all their best players in the recruiting class are from the state of Alabama. And so it's not like, your best recruits are from California or Ohio or Indiana or whatever. It's like they're all from Alabama. So it's not likely that they're going to flip at the last second. And so all of a sudden you start looking at some of the talent coming into this program. I think there's a reason for excitement. So congrats to Auburn fans. You deserve this moment. And yeah, don't really know what else there is to say. All right, so we're going to take a quick break. One more break. We'll come back and we will talk the playoff picture. After Saturday, Alabama loses, Ole Miss loses, A&M loses, Indiana loses. What does it mean? What does it not mean? And what are the crazy scenarios that could come up? Quick break. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what. Do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. So first of all, very quiet crowd in the chat. We got a nice group in the chat, but speak up. Let me know. What do you think? What do you think of Saturday? All that good stuff. Whatever. Let's keep the conversation going. And what I want to do now is, with all of these results, just have a bigger picture conversation of what the playoff picture looks like, because we now know a couple teams that are going to play for conference championships. And I think we kind of know, who's in, who isn't. And by the way, part of the reason I want to do this is because, come Monday, all the usual suspects, I won't say their names, you know who they are going to start making the case that Alabama should still be in the mix, that Ole Miss should still be in the mix. By the way, I've seen a lot of South Carolina buzz, which is kind of weird to me. Obviously, they still have to play Clemson this coming week. But what I want to do, I want to have a realistic conversation about where the playoff picture is right now, because right now, I think it's kind of interesting. I think if things kind of go to plan, there's kind of like 11 teams for 12 spots, and that 12th spot becomes interesting. So obviously, in terms of teams that are still very much alive, SEC champion, we know that. What we know now, Georgia is playing in the SEC championship game, okay? I think regardless of even if Georgia takes a third loss, I don't see the scenario where they are left out. Georgia will play the winner of Texas and Texas A&M in that championship game, where it gets interesting. And by the way, we're going to do a lot of, the meme where the guy's pointing in all different directions and there's strings attached, whatever. There is, we're going to do basically like that. And it's really hard to kind of verbally explain, but you got to bear with me. As a matter of fact, before I even get into this, producer Matt, why don't you do us all a favor? Pop up what the bracket looked like coming into this week. Okay. So thank you for turning that around, producer Matt. This is what the bracket looked like coming into the week. And it is worth noting. So 1 seed was Oregon as the Big Ten champ. 2 seed was Texas as the SEC champ. 3 seed was Miami as the ACC champ. 4 seed was Boise as the Group of 5 champ. And then from there, Ohio State at 5. At 6, we had Penn State. 7, Indiana. 8 is Notre Dame. 9 is Alabama. 10 is Ole Miss. 11 is Georgia. And then 12 is BYU as the Big 12 champ. So, of course, it's worth noting that of that bracket, the 7 seed Indiana lost, the 9 seed Alabama lost, the 10 seed Ole Miss lost, and the 12 seed BYU lost. And that doesn't even take into account that Colorado was in the mix in the Big 12. Texas A&M lost as they were one of the first teams out. So there was just a lot of carnage across college football on Saturday. So let's bring it back now, and let's just talk about who we know is in. We know that Oregon is playing in the Big Ten championship game, almost certainly against Ohio State. Whoever wins that game is in. Big Ten champ is in. SEC champ, Georgia versus the winner of Texas A&M. Winner of that game is in, and we can get into hypotheticals after. ACC, this is crazy. SMU has clinched a spot in the ACC championship game. They are 10-1 going into their final game of the season. What has to happen now? If Miami wins on Saturday, they play at Syracuse. If Miami wins on Saturday, Miami will play SMU in the ACC championship game. The winner there goes to the college football playoff. If Miami loses, Clemson would go to the ACC championship game. Remember, Clemson's ACC schedule is done. So even if they lose to South Carolina, it has no impact on if they play for an ACC championship game. So really the game that you have to monitor in the ACC this weekend is Miami at Syracuse. Big 12. Not even going to get into how crazy it is, but there's 4 teams tied in the loss column: Arizona State, Iowa State, BYU, and Colorado. To make it as simple as we can, if Arizona State and Iowa State win, they are both in. It certainly gets more complicated from there. The only thing I would say, I know so many people care about Colorado. If Colorado basically needs a lot of help. They need 2 of those teams to lose. If they win, they would be in. Otherwise, there's really not a direct pathway if everybody wins. So that's the setup. Obviously, Boise in the Group of 5. So we have those 5 automatic bids. And I think at this point, we can start slotting teams in, assuming nothing crazy happens. I think Indiana gets in even after the loss. I think as long as they beat Purdue, doesn't matter they lost to Ohio State, doesn't matter the margin of victory, who cares? They are in. Outside of Indiana, Penn State, all they got to do, barely beat Minnesota, held on for dear life, fake punt that if they messed up, probably would have lost that game. Doesn't matter. If Penn State wins this weekend, they are in. Tennessee, win this weekend against Vandy, which will not be an easy game. Win that game, you're in. And then on top of that, Notre Dame beat USC this weekend, win, and you're in. So there's 5 automatic bids. Penn State, Indiana, Tennessee, and Notre Dame. If they win, they are in. Ohio State or Oregon, whoever loses the Big Ten championship game, whoever wins, they are in. So that's now 10 teams. Where it gets interesting is those final 2 spots, okay? And I'll try to be quick and I'll try to make as much sense as I possibly can, and I don't know if I will, but here goes. One of those spots, I feel pretty confident will go to the winner of Texas and Texas A&M, because whoever wins the Texas A&M game is going to the SEC championship game. The committee has basically said the loser of the SEC championship game is not going to be eliminated. Now, the cleanest pathway, or if you're a fan of another school hoping to get your school in, I think you got to root for Texas this weekend, okay? Because if Texas loses that game, that would mean that Texas A&M is going to the SEC championship game. Now, I'm not sure that I believe that a 4-loss Texas A&M that does not win in the SEC championship game should get in. So to even backtrack, and I know this is a little confusing, I'm just trying to make as much sense of it as I can. So as I said, there's basically 10 spots guaranteed. I'll reset it. The 5 automatic bids plus the loser of the Big Ten championship game is going to get in. That's probably going to be either Ohio. That is almost certainly going to be either Ohio State or Oregon. Georgia, I think, is in no matter what. Big Ten, I'm even confusing myself now. So basically, there's 10 spots, and the winner of Texas A&M, I think, is in good shape. What would be interesting if Texas A&M were to beat Texas and then lose in the SEC championship game, that sets up a wild conundrum for this reason. First off, do we put in a Texas A&M team that at that point would have 4 losses? Okay. So Texas A&M lost to Notre Dame early in the season. They lost at South Carolina a few weeks ago. They lost at Auburn this past week. And if they get to the SEC championship game, they would lose to Georgia in this hypothetical. Now, if they lose to Texas this weekend, they're out. But if they lose in the SEC championship game, I don't know what the committee does, because the committee would be punishing A&M for playing an extra game. The other thing is, if you're not going to put Texas A&M in, does that mean that you put Texas in that just lost to Texas A&M? What I think becomes even more interesting, let's say Texas wins on Saturday against Texas A&M. That eliminates Texas A&M, and that basically means 4 teams from the Big Ten, 3 from the SEC. It'd be Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee, Notre Dame, the Big 12 champ, the ACC champ, all that. And then that 12 spot becomes fascinating, okay? The 12 spot, then it sets up for a lot of fascinating conversations. One, I think the team that would actually be in the best spot in that hypothetical is the loser of the ACC championship game, especially if it's SMU or Miami, okay? If it's SMU or Miami, both those teams would be 11-2, lose in a conference championship game. You'd be punishing them for losing. So I think that team would be in great shape. I think it's also worth noting, depending on how the ACC championship game goes, I've seen some talk, people trying to make the argument for Clemson. I don't really know that I totally see the Clemson argument, just because basically their best win would be over a South Carolina team this coming weekend that's currently 8-4. They just don't have a lot of great wins on their schedule. Nobody currently ranked in the top 25. I don't know. I don't really know what Clemson's argument would be. So to me, this is the point. Just pay attention to what happens in the ACC championship game this week. And then I think, as importantly, see what happens this weekend with Texas and Texas A&M. If Texas wins, it creates a very interesting scenario at number 12, because again, would it be the ACC runner-up? By the way, does it bring back in 3-loss SEC teams? Is that how Alabama gets back in the conversation? How Ole Miss gets back in the conversation? So yeah, that's basically it. I think I just spent more time confusing myself than anybody else, so I apologize for that. But the bottom line is, it looks like we're going to get 4 Big Ten teams, probably 3 SEC teams. If Texas A&M were to beat Texas and lose in the SEC championship game, it sets up an interesting conversation. But I think the big winners from Saturday, maybe that's the best way I should put it. The big winners from Saturday, with all the chaos, with Ole Miss and Alabama losing, truthfully, the biggest winners, in my opinion, probably Tennessee. All you got to do is beat Vandy, and you're not going to the SEC championship game. Biggest winner is Tennessee. Second biggest winner is probably Indiana, because Indiana now doesn't really matter. As long as you beat Purdue, you're in. And then I think finally, the ACC is probably the third big winner, because I think there's a pathway for a second team in the ACC right now. Big 12, whoever wins that conference championship is in. Probably going to be Arizona State versus Iowa State. And then there's chaos and carnage from there. All right. I just spent the last 10 minutes of this show confusing myself. So I apologize for that. I hope that segment made some sense. I was just trying to set the playoff picture. And like I said, I think I confused myself a little bit. And I'll tell you what, doesn't really feel like there's a lot in the chat today. So maybe we get out of here on a little bit of a quicker Aaron Torres pod. Do me a favor. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, do me a favor. What are you doing? Subscribe on YouTube. Make sure to click the subscribe button, all that good stuff. And make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. All for today's show. Appreciate everybody's support. And I will be back. If you're listening on podcast, we'll have the college football betting show on Tuesday. Back on YouTube, TBA. Appreciate everybody's support. We'll talk to you soon. It's time for me to get out of here. Shout out to Torrent Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Reddick, you F-head. Unblock me, bro. I'll be back. Aaron Torres.